unintractable baby burst. Tokyo. Nations want children, but Japan shows it's not easy to produce more. In 1989, Japan seemed to be an unstoppable economic superpower. Its companies were overtaking competitors and gobbling up American icons like Rockefeller Center. But inside the country, the government had identified a looming slow motion crisis. The fertility rate had fallen to a record low. Policymakers called it the 1.57 shock, citing the projected average number of children that women would have over their childbearing years. If births continue to decline, they warned the consequences would be disastrous. Taxes would rise or social security couples would shrink. Japanese children would lack sufficient peer interaction. Society would lose its vitality as the supply of young workers dwindled. It was time to act. Starting in the 1990s, Japan has begun rolling out the policies and pronouncements designed to encourage people to have more babies. The government required employers to offer child care leave of up to a year, opened more subsidized daycare slot, exhorted men to do housework and take paternity leave, and called on companies to shorten work hours. In 1992, the government started paying direct cash allowances for having even one child. Earlier, they had started with the third child, and bi-monthly payments for all children were later introduced. None of this has worked. Last year, Japan's fertility rate stood at 1.2. In Tokyo, the rate is now less than 1. The number of babies born in Japan last year fell to the lowest level since the government started collecting statistics in 1899. Now the rest of the developed world is looking more and more like Japan. According to a report issued in 2019 by the United Nations Population Fund, half of the world's population lives in countries where the fertility rate has fallen below the replacement rate of 2.1 births per woman. Why should countries care about shrinking population at a time of climate change, increasing risk of nuclear catastrophe, and the prospect that artificial intelligence will take over jobs? At a global level? There is no shortage of people, but drastically low birth rate can lead to problems in individual countries. T, one of the authors of the UN report and the deputy director at the Vienna Institute of Demography, dodged the back of the envelope of the calculation to illustrate the point. In South Korea, which has the lowest birth rate in the world at 0.72 children per woman, just over a million babies were born in 1970. Last year, 230,000 were. It's obviously too simple to say that each person born in 2023 will, in prime working years, have to support for retired people. But in the absence of large-scale immigration, the matter will be extremely difficult to organize and deal with for Korean society, Mr. S said. Similar concerns arise from Italy to the United States. Working age population outnumbered by the elderly. Towns emptying out, important jobs are unfilled, business innovation faltering. Immigration could be a straightforward antidote, but in many of the countries with a declining birth rate, accepting large numbers of immigrants has become politically toxic. Across Europe, East Asia, and North America, many governments are, like Japan, introducing measures such as paid parental leave, child care subsidies, and direct cash transfers. According to the UN, the number of countries deliberately focusing birth rate rose from 19 in 1986 to 55 by 2015. The topic had surfaced in the American presidential campaign, with the Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance chastising the country for its low birth rate and defending his past comments that childless cat ladies are running the nation. Mr. Vance had suggested raising the child tax credit and said he would consider a policy like one in Hungary, in which women with multiple children are taxed at a lower rate. On the Democratic side, Vice President Kamala Harris has proposed a $6,000 tax credit for families with infants, while Ms. Harris doesn't present this as a pro-fertility policy. It echoes what other countries are doing. Politicians sometimes suggest that if you offer paid family leave or free day care, birth rate will magically shoot up. But for some 30 years, Japan has been a kind of laboratory for these initiatives, and the research shows that even generous policies yield only slight uptick. After years of political grandstanding and a growing menu of government initiatives, modern families just don't seem to want to grow larger. The policies would need to be very, very coercive to push people to change their preference, Mr. S said, or to have kids they didn't want or plan to have. So what kind of measures might actually induce people to have more babies? And if nothing really works, why not? The Great Baby Bust. There's plenty of evidence that governments can change fertility rates, but generally in one direction, down. Minchell, an associate professor of economics at Virginia Commonwealth University, who had studied the South Korean birth rate, said his mother had told him that if he brought more than 2 kids onto public transportation, it was like a social stigma. In Europe and the United States, fertility rates declined as more women entered the workforce, and the influence of religion, particularly Roman Catholicism, receded. Young people who started to leave the communities where they were raised, pursue careers, and build networks that normalized postponing marriage, had fewer children as they started childbearing later. Lower birth rate signify progress. Declining infant mortality rates reduced the need to have many children. As economies transitioned away from predominantly agricultural or family-owned business that required offspring to run, people focused on leisure and other aspirations. Women could now pursue career goals and personal fulfillment beyond raising children. Undergirding it all was the rise of birth control, which meant that women could determine whether and when they got pregnant. The policies would need to be very, very coercive to push people to change their preferences. Tackling inequality. Despite changes in family and work life, traditional ideas about who should take care of children, women, of course, have proved resistant to policy prescription. Cultural expectations are designed to fit a way of living that doesn't exist anymore, said M., an economist at the London School of Economics and Political Science. That is the root cause of these extremely low fertility rates that we have in rich countries. Pushing marriages. If more gender equality between parents, tax rebate, and cash allowances can't create bigger families, what else can a desperate government do? In Japan, policymakers are trying to a new approach, promoting weddings. Last year, fewer than 500,000 couples got married in Japan, the lowest number since 1933, despite polls showing that most single men and women would like to do so. One obstacle is that many young adults live with their parents. Close to 40% of people aged 20 to 39, according to data from 2016, the latest year for which it is available. Living with your mom is not the best romantic environment for finding your lifelong partner, said L. Director of the Pro-Natalism Initiative at the Institute for Family Studies in Charlotte, Virginia.